terrific.
Awesome.
Thank you so much for joining Rehash. I'm so excited to have you here and to have the opportunity to speak with you. Welcome.
Likewise, I'm very happy to be here and be voted in by a DAO of sorts. It's
Yes.
quite nice.
Yes. Yeah. The people have spoken. They wanted you on the podcast. And so here you are. So you
Yes.
have such an interesting background. You have a PhD in biophysics, which already is so impressive. How did you get from physics into crypto?
Oh, it's quite a long journey, really. Yeah, I was in physics for about a decade. I did like 3 degrees in physics, ended with a PhD in biophysics, ended up getting bored of experimental physics. It involved sitting in dark labs and talking to no one. It's a bit of a secluded sort of life. And I sort of went via astrophysics for a couple of years and then took a job as a maths lecturer. One of my first courses was cryptography. So I taught a number theory and cryptography course. And this was in about 2010, 2011. So I discovered the Bitcoin white paper around that. That was when I sort of first bumped into crypto, um, and then kind of lost track for about 4 or 5 years and went into organizational theory and design with a kind of lens of learning theory and how people learn at scale. So I built a decentralized organization inside an institution, and then the DAO happened, and
Gotcha.
I thought, right, this is how we can take like decentralized organizations onto the internet, and I've just been down the rabbit hole since, and full time for about 4 years now.
Yeah, okay, that makes a lot more sense. So that's how you got into DAOs. And we're going to dive into more of your take on that, including cybernetic governance frameworks, which is like sort of the latest thing that you've written about, and that I have no idea what any of that means. So I can't wait to dive into that with you. But just real quick, going back to the physics thing, like how do you think physics and crypto intersect?
I think they're going to do more with DeSci as a thing. I think largely the kind of STEM fields. There's only a handful of academics in crypto really, but yeah, I think the sort of philosophical approach is it crosses over in the kind of experimental design. Like the way in which you think about physics is in like hard reducible quantitative experimentation. So there's like the experimentation. I was an experimental physicist. Crypto is very experimental, right? But you can think about a lot of what's happening is basically like decentralized research projects. So it's got a very experimental mindset, and it's all about numbers ultimately. Um, and the way that we collapse things to like truth feels like a crossover with physics. But yeah, and I think it converges on the maths and modeling and all that sort of stuff. But yeah, I haven't really thought about that before. An interesting question.
Yeah. Do you find yourself, well, I was going to say, do you find yourself, applying some of that thinking to DAOs and experimenting with DAO design and governance design and things like that? But I guess you said you haven't really thought about it that much. But
Well, I think I definitely bring a lot of the mindset with me. I actually just generally thinking about how I think about the world, and I moved from physics all the way through the softer sciences. I ended up as an associate dean at London College of Fashion. So
oh, interesting.
I actually went from physics to fashion and a lot of disciplines in between. Um, so yeah, I saw a lot of different organizational forms, and yeah, just the way that you look at the world, if you like. I think crypto feels like a place where we're gonna have the kind of next revolution in how we look at the world, in my view.
Yeah. And do you think a lot of that will happen through the lens of DAOs and rethinking organizational design and things like that?
I do. I think I see DAOs as the kind of the way you can plug humans into blockchains. So, it's starting at Bitcoin. That's literally just a ledger of who's owed what. Very secure, transactive blockchain. And then with Ethereum, you get this ability to, program that money. And then DAOs allow you to essentially allow humans to control what's going on. And that opens up a whole world of like what I call well, it's what others call socio-technical systems too, which is like this kind of merger of humans and code.
Yeah. So now, with how you're thinking about DAOs, I guess a good place to start, and this is a question that actually Zach, Fifth World Zach, had for you and his nomination is what do you think, like, how would you describe the actual current state of DAOs today? Be honest.
Oh, a mess. A big
Yeah.
mess. No, I mean, I love these things. I love like, I'm up there as like the most dow-pilled people out there, right? But I'm very critical of like the state of it all. We're not living up to the potential just yet. But I also think that's entirely expected, given the nature and complexity of these systems. Um, yeah, the way I've been thinking about it is we we've got this kind of new tool set that's unlocked, but we're still thinking in the old world, right? We've got the new tools, we don't know how to use them yet. And largely what we're doing is kind of falling back into let's put everything into committee structures. And we're almost like recreating slightly institutional forms of governance. It's like we've gone past the board of directors top down hierarchy a little bit, but still we're just trying to put like management sciences into decentralized systems, and it just doesn't work. And we either do this kind of let's vote on everything, absolutely everything, and what you can vote on is everything, so we have this kind of open scope. Anyone can make a proposal about anything, and it just all spirals into a complete mess. So I can see. I think we'll have this kind of rapid iteration out of it. I've been expecting this kind of like DAO takeoff moment for a long time, but we're just kind of still on the flat bit at the moment, and we need a kind of revolution in our thinking, I think, to make it work.
Right. The way I kind of have seen it is I think there are a couple things that we tend to do just as humans. And one of those is the way that we think about Web3 tends to be very skeuomorphic, which makes sense, right?
Yeah.
We take the old ways of thinking and we think, how can we make this better in a new way? But that's not really like original type of thought. It's still very much taking what we already know and just applying a different spin to it. And then the other thing I think we tend to do is overcorrect for things.
Hmm.
So, for example, like a lot of people that were attracted to DAOs, maybe not originally, but at least I would say in that 2022 DAO wave when everyone and everything wanted to be a DAO and
Yeah.
everyone was like, I want to work in a DAO. Like I think a
The
lot
good
of
old days.
right, a lot of the people that came in with that wave were people who really didn't like that traditional corporate hierarchical structure and wanted to have like a more decentralized or flatter organizational structure. And so there was that overcorrection of like, because we hate hierarchical structures, we're just going to have no hierarchy whatsoever, no management, and everything was chaos because it was just everybody was on the same playing field, but without any sort of leader or guidance, or no one knew what to do. And so things, either would just like explode into chaos or nothing would get done. So that's kind of, I'm interested to hear your take on that too. If you would agree with that, or if you think there's like other reasons why we haven't really seen DAOs take off just yet, and how can we get over these humps?
Yeah, I think it's really astute observation. I think that they're both correct. I think it is genuinely a new paradigm, right? So the kind of skeuomorphic, let's like slightly iterate, organize, or let's imagine this. It's an organization on the blockchain. Let's bring the organization that we kind of know and love from the real world, and they're all a mess in the real world as well, of course.
Right.
And because they're more open, they're open, porous organizations where people come in and out. You're just adding, masses more complexity into the system. So it's a new paradigm of organization. Decentralized organizations have actually been around for like thousands of years, and actually we were better at it many years ago than we are now. We've kind of like over-indexed in the real world on hierarchy and centralization, which I think we're manifesting the outcomes of in the real world at the moment. We've seen this huge coalescence of power and centralization in the real world, and everything's starting to break. So I have a lot of hope that DAOs will put this like selective pressure on decentralized organization as a form. Now, people aren't used to that. People aren't used to thinking in that mindset around self-organization and islands of autonomy and sort of local scope of behavior. So we need to have that mindset change to make that work. And to the other point around sort of I call them flat augurs, the people that believe in this kind
I
of
like it.
perfectly flat hierarchy. This has happened again in communes went through all this in like the 60s and 70s, where we're checking out from society, we're going to set it up ourselves, and like no hierarchy here, and then they all collapsed, and the people who were like implicitly powerful in various ways rose to the top and turned them into sort of disaster zones. So in many ways, we're just speed running all the mistakes that we've made before, but in this kind of new realm, which I think is an important part of the growth process. So yeah, I think the next era is like, what is the new approaches? What are the new practices that do work in these places? And I think that's more about like curation, and you can't get away from hierarchy, right? You need leadership. You need people who are empowered to be able to lead others in these systems. It's doing that in a way where everyone maintains their own autonomy, and you don't end up with just managers telling people
Right.
what to do.
Yeah. You said curation. What do you mean by that?
So yeah, a sort of mantra of mine, curation is the game, which is like, so curation being okay in the kind of new world. There's like an idea from organizational sciences called garbage can decision making, and it's a real sort of thing that can happen in very sort of messy organizational contexts, which is like everyone's throwing their ideas in, right? Just like ideas. Everyone throws them in the pot. It's like throwing them in the garbage can. The problem is now you've got a garbage can full of ideas. Like within there is gold probably. If you've got good people
Mhm.
and everyone's got the ability to create ideas and innovate, what you need then is to curate through mechanisms the good stuff out. So like now you've got all the stuff in the garbage can. How do you make the good ideas float to the top? And this has been like a concept I've been thinking about for a long time. I'm very set on ideas around quadratic voting and reputation weighted voting. I've never give up on token curated registries, which was like a really hyped thing in like 2018. But the blockchains weren't scalable enough for them to really work. But yeah, there's mechanisms in there that will allow everyone to throw these ideas in the pot, but through kind of collective action, we find the best ones. That's kind of what I mean by curation.
Yeah. And have you thought about solutions to that? Like, how can we actually curate effectively?
Yeah, I've been developing tools along this line for quite a while. I've developed a version of quadratic voting I call semantic ballot voting, which is basically it's a kind of token curated registry where you create lists of any semantic tag meaning,
Mhm.
and then everyone has a kind of identity and can vote with a budget of voting power to sort them by their preference. And then you aggregate everyone's preference and you get a kind of global preference. And now I'm looking at integrated this with LLMs and collecting natural language relating to these bits of meaning. So you end up with like lists of hashtags weighted by everyone's preference, and then everyone's talking about them. And the LLM basically interprets all that data and tells everyone what they want. And like, actually, it looks like you all want to do this. Is that right? And then all they've got to do is vote yes or no at that point, and now you can start spending the treasury in alignment with what people wish.
That makes a lot of sense. Is that what you're building through Factory DAO?
Yeah, yeah,
Okay. Okay, cool. Yeah.
yeah.
So Factory DAO too. Well, since we're on that topic now, can you talk a little bit about what that is? It's the DAO. I think the tagline is what like the DAO that's building DAOs or something. Sounds
Yes,
very like
it's
Inception y.
it's a meta DAO, or it will be. Yeah, so I've had this idea of yeah, DAOs will emerge from decentralized contexts. So DAOs need to be launched in a decentralized way. And yeah, I've had this idea in mind for a kind of DAO framework, if you like, or a network that now I'm thinking about it like a network, which will Fractal DAO will be a protocol DAO that governs DAOs which have specific interest. So you can imagine a network with like a swarm of agents, each of which have a DAO.
Mhm.
But where Factory DAO came from was basically us trying to build in a decentralized context and ending up with lots of little tools that do different bits, like modular primitives. So the DAO world was stuck in this very monolithic idea of DAOs that was basically let's all put our money in a pot and decide how to spend it. And it was all in a kind of single smart contract, and it was very rigid. And really, in where we're going in the decentralized world is uncharted land. We don't know what we're going to need. So you ultimately need a system where you can have lots of modular tools and systems for governing the modular tools. So yeah, Factory DAO is meant to be a DAO factory.
Uh,
It's like a reconceptualization of the factory idea, where ultimately you can imagine a system that gets so good at launching these things, you can speed it up and you can start to ship them like a production line. So it filters ideas into projects and launches them. So a DAO that launches DAOs, basically.
nice. And is it what stage of building is it? Like, can people use it now, or is it still being built out, or where is it at?
It's still being built out. I think we've had users in all of our different tools over the years. It's been in a state of exploration, you might say, for about 3 or 4 years. We've got the 5 or 6 core primitives that I think you need, which take you through the whole DAO life cycle. So there's 3 of which are kind of very token economics orientated. So they're, you know, one of the things that DAOs haven't looked at too much is the fact that all of these have like a token generally, or tokens. So launching itself without completely autonomously, how do you get a token into the market without centralized exchanges, without permission? How do they bootstrap funding? How do they crowdfund the money that they need? So we've built a whole bunch of systems for crowdfunding. So you can see it's a bit like Juicebox in Elements, but for you can raise on NFTs or tokens, and then auction the tokens to bootstrap a market. And then we've got some governance related bits. We've got a platform called Influence, which is very focused on NFT and reputation weighted voting. So we've got these tools as like bank, launch, yield, influence, mint, and all of these different tools. And we think we've got those now. And we're looking for the right context in which to stitch them all together into a kind of framework. And we're now thinking about potentially like an app chain focused on decentralized AI as the way to do that. So yeah, we're starting to look at the way to go to market with this, and we're doing some work with ZK Sync as a
Mhm.
potential to plug some of these tools into their DAO. But yeah, it's pretty much ready to go. Actually, we've been building for 4 years now, and now just looking for the right entry point into the market.
Yeah. How does decentralized AI play into what you've talked about?
Yeah, so thinking about these curation mechanisms, I about 10 years ago when I was working in this decentralized organization, I was working on these systems for, this thing had about 800 academics inside it, all throwing ideas into the pot. And I was using early AI systems at the time to kind of, you know, respond to searches and pull out the relevant documents to people. Like I'm interested in educational technology, so it pulls out all the relevant documents that people had put in. But it was really difficult and slow and expensive. But in the last 2 years, we've had this like the cost of AI has plummeted harder than like it's more deflationary than any technology that's ever existed. So it's just got feasible to really massively scale AI systems. And so yeah, it comes into it in the sense that DAOs have never really found their like killer use case yet. I think there's one emerging around the governance of L2s, like protocol DAOs, and, and governing DeFi projects. But the one that could make it go sort of mass market, I think, is a community where everyone's talking and hanging out in it, and they have an AI that they govern. So all of the DAO tooling is focused on you can come in, set your community up. It's a DAO. You don't even need to know what a DAO is. You just hang around in this group, and you vote on governing this AI and feeding it data and curating it, and then potentially launching tokens to monetize it. And now you've got a DAO. So it's kind of a way of my Trojan horse, if you like,
Right.
of bringing in people into the DAO world.
Yeah, absolutely. As with anything in crypto or blockchain, it's always better if people don't know what
Yeah.
they're dealing with. DAOs are better if they don't know they're part of a DAO. Crypto is better if people don't know they're using crypto. So that's we're still working on that.
Yeah, 100%. And yeah, and I just think like for me, DAOs have this possibility of being the thing that actually goes mainstream because people are already in communities, right? People spend a lot of time in chat groups. People spend a lot of time in community groups in their local area. And really, the tools that we're building here have the potential to level up communities of any kind. If we can just make it all usable enough, we can give communities essentially a bank account that's no one could take away from them. And if we give them tools for, making decisions together, and an AI that helps them make sense of what they all want, then this could be the thing that actually could get real normal everyday people into crypto.
Totally. Yeah. So I want to get into cybernetic governance framework, which you
Yeah,
recently published a post on I think it was the ZK Nation forum,
yeah,
right? About this. So maybe where do we start? I guess what is I hope I'm not the only person that would be asking this question, but what is cybernetics? Let's just start there.
yeah. So um, I'm kind of running back a term that emerged in the kind of 60s and 70s, which was like this. Again, it was kind of DAOs before DAOs, if you like. It was an idea that you could take a sort of mechanical look at the way we organize, and we'd find this kind of new hyper efficient way of organizing by like sharing information properly and integrating feedback loops into everything. So it ended up blooming into this weird discipline which involved like control theory and like information theory and complexity science and all of these different things. And then it got really unwieldy. Like governments were like looking at like bringing these ideas together, but really it's about building like regulation into things, and by regulation I mean things that like self-regulate. So you build these feedback loops into your organization so it evolves and learns based on the context in which it's happened. And a bunch of people like Stafford Beer built these kind of like frameworks that a lot of people use, but it kind of died. It didn't live up to it. A bit like DAOs could do if we don't do it properly, right? It was like an idea that kind of died on the vine, and kind of got neglected. But the idea was we could end up with hyper efficient organizations that respond almost organically to context. So the what I'm trying to do is kind of push, and largely I'm kind of running with how that DAO is set up. So Rafa the builder, Rafa, who's the head of governance over at ZK Sync, is has he brought this new idea called token programs, which is instead of coming to the DAO and saying, give me some money, I'm going to go build something with it, or give me some money and I'm going to go run some events or something. You have to bring a smart contract. You have to bring a mechanism to the DAO. And that mechanism will be more permissionless and trustless. And this is largely where my sort of head has been with Factory DAO for a long time. The way into this new era of DAOs is that you stop it all spiraling into subcommittees and just trusting people not to misspend money, by using the affordances of the technology, using smart contracts. So I came there with a framework of like how do you manage a kind of suite of smart contracts that plug into the DAO treasury and flow tokens to people for various things. Um, and instead of the DAO and the delegates just being asked to deliberate on whether we should do this event or whether we should give money for these things, just really complex open scope decisions, all we're doing is turning smart contracts off and on, or dialing how much tokens go into them and evaluating how they've performed. So I see this as a potential way of unlocking, the cybernetics idea. I've always thought DAOs were the way to bring cybernetics back in many ways, and that was kind of my riff on how we could potentially do it in that DAO.
Gotcha. So it's essentially the core problem that you're trying to solve with this is kind of the core problem of DAOs. It's like, how do we build more trust
Yep,
through trustless systems, like through smart contracts, right?
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So with the cybernetic governance framework that you proposed, can you give some examples of how real life applications of like if a DAO were to implement this framework, what that would look like?
Yeah, so there's a kind of live thing going on at the moment. So one of the first token programs there is to kind of bootstrap the liquidity and ZK Sync. So they've got this thing called the Ignite proposal, which is a classic kind of like liquidity mining sort of system. So one of the ways that you conceptualize it, and that's starting with, a group of people who make periodic decisions to decide where the tokens go to. And yeah, what I'm trying to push for is that we replace that group of people with smart contracts, right? So one classic example would be we have this kind of routing contract, which could have decision-making inputs. So, there's the money goes into smart contracts and then flows to other systems, DeFi projects, and whatever through more trust minimized mechanistic processes. So instead of a group of people decide where these tokens go, a smart contract does based on the data that goes into it. Some of that could be votes, some of that could be Oracle data, some of that could be, things like token prices, TVL data, that kind of thing. So you end up with like mechanisms that feed in data and then decide where the tokens go. Other things might be similar to the kind of curation mechanisms that I talked about earlier. You can imagine a smart contract that picks up, let's say, 1 million tokens and then distributes them based on the outcome of a vote curated by quadratic voting. So, like in many ways, quadratic funding and the stuff that's been happening in Gitcoin is one of these kind of like cybernetic contracts that you can think of. Money goes into a pot and then people put money in and it distributes out to wider projects. So yeah, anything from bootstrapping ecosystem funding for projects to flowing tokens for liquidity, to making decisions that respond to data from the wider ecosystem, that kind of stuff.
Yeah. So what do you think is preventing DAOs from implementing this today? Is it just like logistically challenging to do, or are there other challenges to this?
Um, I think the first one is the mindset. Like I've been trying to push ideas like this for a few years, but there's been a real desire to just retain control. And it's like I could invest money on doing this in a more trustless fashion, or I could just do it, you know?
Yeah.
And getting over that attitude is really difficult. Like I just prefer to make the decisions myself, actually, And now I've had in mind like a couple of directions that force that issue. One is the regulation gets really stringent, and it's like you just can't have your hands on any intermediating transactions anymore. Like it has to be smart contracts all the way through, or you get in lots of trouble. And that could happen, and probably will eventually. And the other is a recognition that actually decentralization is what builds good ecosystems, right? Because it empowers people instead of locating the power around this small group, and you have to kind of know who sort of games around. And this has happened with a lot of DAOs, where it's the people who actually make the decisions on that multi-sig end up like elevating in status, and it becomes a kind of who game, so how you get it. that means it's just that person's friends that end up with the money, and that doesn't build good network effects, right? The way to actually build like really like flourishing ecosystems is by taking out the center and letting them go. So that attitudinally has been the issue, and also there's some just interesting technical problems about how you actually get to trustless execution. So one of the things is like ideally we get from um, a DAO vote that triggers all these smart contracts, and there's no humans in the loop anywhere. You know, it's like a transaction flows through a set of contracts and triggers things, um, and we've just fully automated the pipeline. And it's just an interesting technical problem that we've not quite cracked yet, but it's doable. We're pretty close to it now, and I think we could see really complex decision making systems be fully trustless in the next few years.
Yeah, I think with regards to that first point about the mindset and people being resistant to actual full decentralization, I think it is scary to, fully decentralize because, as we all know, there are bad actors out there. And
Yeah,
unless you have a super, super robust system, that can be exploited by people who, are skilled at doing so. And like even we had a question in the chat, or somebody, DeWoofy in the chat was saying, does this earlier when you were talking about decentralized AI, he was saying, does this mean I can bribe an AI to vote a certain way? Um,
yes.
yes,
Like,
right. Yeah, yeah.
no,
So,
I mean, no, yeah, literally. I mean, like these things end up at crypto economic games at the end of the day. I mean, we're seeing this in like literally the election that's going on now. Like over like economic, like Elon's giving $1 million a day away to people who vote a certain way. In crypto economic systems, voting systems will end up at like almost pseudo bribery games, right? So it's where governance and crypto economics mix. So it ends up like literally. This was always the dream of governance tokens, actually, which is like you're literally buying to influence. You're buying influence over a crypto economic system. So I actually do have in mind crypto economic mechanisms for like changing the personality of an AI. So like I want it to behave more like this, so I'm going to pay to make that happen. It's definitely actually one of the outcomes for doing it.
yeah,
But yeah,
that's kind of
to your
scary,
point
right?
about
Yeah.
it is well, it's actually could be it's better than Sam Altman decides how they behave and like controls the truth, right?
Right.
It's like I'd far prefer an open crypto economic system deciding the governance of the way an AI behaves than a board of directors
But
which has Sam Altman.
If Sam Altman has all the money, then it would still be Sam Altman
Oh
deciding.
yeah, I mean like that. Yeah, absolutely. And there's limits on these things, but at least they're open mechanisms,
Right,
right?
right.
And which kind of goes back to what you were initially saying is like, yeah, the reason why people don't, just go, okay, then let's decentralize is because that's the way you can get like catastrophic failure modes, right? Which
Hmm.
is like, okay, we've decentralized and oops, it's completely broken. We've been governance attacked or like, this actor has taken over the downs, not much we can do about it now. And there's good reason to not rush into these things, right? There's good reason not to like open up your entire mechanism, your entire treasury, to like untested mechanisms. That would be crazy. So the angle I'm using in that post is like progressive automation, right? It's like progressive decentralization got kind of used to, well, we'll start centralized and we'll decentralize later, and then no one ever does. But a way into it is just like or incrementally automating all the paths that you're happy with. But yeah, every game will be gamed is like one of the things that I think about a lot. And the way around this is that you have these evolutionary mechanisms. So one of the ways I've sort of represented that there is like, okay, we try all these different mechanisms, we run them for a period of time, we evaluate it at the end of that, and if it was good, we'll just roll it again. And we're always expecting these things to break and be gamed. Even if it doesn't happen the first time, it might happen the second time. But if it does, we'll just switch it off and put another one on. And instead of the whole thing being all in on one mechanism, it's actually a whole pluralistic set of mechanisms, and we're all evaluating them all the time and iterating them based on whether they worked or not.
Yeah. Is there a way to design a governance framework where it's not just the people with the most money, the whales, have the most governance power? Is there a way to design it so that you cannot buy your governance power?
So this is what I've been probably most focused on for the last 3 or 4 years. Exactly that question. I think the thing, one of the major things that has held DAOs back is that you have to be a whale basically to even make it worthwhile voting, right? There's quite a lot of these systems have like like Compound has 180,000 holders and 12 people vote, and because there's simply no point. So this it systemically disempowers the whole, most of the participants. So yeah, I think the path into it is this is why I kind of was very interested in NFT governance. So non-fungible governance. So every person or identity has its own individual voting power, and that can be earned over time based on your participation in the DAO. So yeah, this voting system that I built, essentially everyone gets a budget of voting power, and you can imagine a perfectly egalitarian DAO where there's 1,000 people in, with each have 100 voting credits, and the power distribution is perfectly flat. But then you can change each person's individual budget based on how much they've participated in the DAO for non-financial things. So it's the path to non-financial governance. The problem is, and because there's no free lunch in these things, is that it just then becomes what I call the Sybil war. And the game is like now to Sybil the system to get the power. And if you build like particularly Sybil sensitive systems, you have to very carefully manage who gets those identities. And that becomes the sort of real game in those systems.
Yeah, that the way that you just described, that's actually sort of how Rehash is set up. Not that Rehash is a DAO, but like the governance function within Rehash is set up to be more or less decentralized. That's how, you got on the podcast by getting voted on by the
Yeah.
community. But the way that we've from the start, I've always said I don't want this to be where you can just buy your governance power. Like I don't just want
Yeah.
whoever has the most money to have the most say in what guests come on the podcast, because that's just going to turn into like big organizations with a lot of money are just
Yeah.
going to throw a lot of money in and then get their people on the podcast, right? And it just becomes like a shill fest.
Yeah.
So we set it up from the beginning as like through NFTs that you hold in your wallet, but it's one wallet, one vote. So it doesn't really matter how many NFTs you hold. Like it doesn't matter how many podcast episodes you collect. It's just
Yeah.
one wallet, one vote. Of course, like you can collect a new podcast episode from 100 different wallets in order to. So I'm not saying there aren't ways to get around that.
Yeah.
But for the most part, it's one wallet, one vote, and then the way to sort of earn more votes is through participation. So we implemented this a few seasons ago where if you nominate somebody who ends up making it onto the podcast, you get essentially like so each wallet gets 1,000 votes. You'll get 500 extra votes to use in the
Yeah.
next season. And if you vote for somebody who ends up making it on, you get 100 votes for each person you help vote onto the podcast. So it's like really rewarding people that are actively participating by giving
Yeah.
them more votes. So
Very similar. Yeah. That's
it's kind of how you
converged on
just
similar
described.
ideas.
Yeah, and obviously like Rehash is a very small community compared to like these bigger protocols, and so we haven't faced those Sybil issues that you've talked about, and it's been
You might have. You might
that's
have.
true. Yeah, no,
And
we might have.
yeah, this is the thing, and Sybil's are very crafty, and there's and there might, but again, it's kind of when you're voting in podcast, and there is definitely that attack vector that you definitely want to keep an eye on. There's if you end up starting getting people on through the votes that maybe I wouldn't have done that, and it might be because of this Sybil problem's got out of hand. But when it's a treasury with $1 billion in, that's when
Right.
the game really changes. It's like what is being voted on is a function of the value at risk, if you like. And yeah, people will do it for like clout and influence and any other reasons, but yeah, it ultimately gets down to this civil problem, and it's a really challenging thing to get around.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. One last question. This one's from Andy Boyan on Twitter. That's kind of related to what we're talking about now. He said, agentic governance sounds great, but also like one of those things that 98% of people will use but not care about until it breaks, leaving a lot of dissatisfaction and suspicion towards engineers and the people who actually design the systems. So then how does this help solve for one of the most challenging governance problems, which is faith in government slash governance?
Yeah, interesting. So um, the idea that I think what I'm trying to build at the moment, we're running a project called London Voice, and the idea is we get real Londoners in. So, this isn't like weird crypto people. This is like everyday London residents, and we run kind of citizens assemblies, and we onboard them into an app called Voice, or London Voice in this case. And they use our voting curation system to do the thing that I mentioned earlier, which is vote on all the issues that they care about. So you'll have things like, economy, climate change, healthcare, all the issues that people, care about. And they vote on them and talk about them, and we generate an agent, London Voice. And I think, our goal there is to empower people, collect voices so they have more influence. Um, and we're going to communities where they, because they don't have a strong collective voice, they are in a context where they're not being listened to. So I think before we get to the problems I think Andy's talking about there, which is like when they start making bad decisions, we need to get them into a state where they're making some decisions, like um, or even just representing people. Like I think it'll genuinely be a bad idea to let agents run loose on blockchains. That like I can see a path to AI agents being fully autonomous, going and doing mad things, and having a treasury and being able to buy their own buy their own compute from decentralized compute
Yeah.
things. So being effectively completely unstoppable at that point.
That's
Should
a good
probably not
Black
rush.
Mirror episode.
Yeah, we should probably not rush into that one.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, people are doing it, right? People are actively like, let's do that because that sounds great. But I think like Andy's question is a really interesting one, which is like, if like, do we just get more disempowered because we're just handing off our power to these agents, and then fine, we just get really like just they're just doing everything now, and then they start making terrible decisions, and we end up in some kind of worse state than we even started before. My sort of philosophy on this is that there should always be humans in the loop for how these agents behave. Um, the decisions that they make should always have the consent of the sort of collective that they're representing. And I think that's actually the key to what the alignment problem and all these sorts of things is like actually having AIs being democratically controlled. So we need to make sure that we're ruling the AIs rather than the other way around is kind
Right.
of what the future I would prefer, at least anyway.
Same. Definitely.
Yeah,
Very much so. I want to get to a few more questions from our community on Twitter. There are a
cool.
few in the privacy and surveillance realm. And so the first one is from Fifth World Zach. He wants to hear your hot takes on privacy and surveillance.
Yeah, I have many. I think, um, yeah, look, we're in a world now which is, everyone went sort of like mad about, the early cypherpunks were very, very concerned about creeping nation state level surveillance, right? And the tools that surveil people. And at that point, they were worried about like wiretapping, like picking up a wired telephone
Right.
and the people in the middle, like being able to listen to it. Now we've got AI, right? The abilities of, I mean, you just need to use GPT and look at its memories function. And it's like, Nick has a, 5-year-old daughter and is planning a birthday party, and it builds up this list of things that are just like little nuggets of information about me that other people are doing as well. just based on everything that you're doing on the internet. Like literally every bit of data that can be collected about you has been collected about you. And now there's agents building like digital twins of you to kind of predict what that you're going to do next,
I'm
right?
low
So
key
like,
panicking right now. Even though like
yeah,
I know all this has been happening, I just like haven't thought. Hearing you say it back, I'm like, oh my gosh, it's
I
real.
mean, trust me, it can send you a bit paranoid thinking about it, and like I do worry about it, like
Yeah.
genuinely. The capabilities of surveillance have just skyrocketed, and in fact, and less even worried about governments doing it because at least they have like the laws to follow, right? At least they have due process. And if they're gonna like do anything with that data, you have to have broken the law somewhere. Like, but what I'm worried about is like corporate surveillance. Like, all of these, it's literally just an open war game now where everyone's doing this for you to just sell you stuff, right?
Right.
And a lot of these AI companies want you to install agents on your computer that give you full visibility of your computers and everything. So surveillance is going to become a real issue in the near future for everyone, and it's going to start getting creepy. Like you're going to be agents are going to know things about you that you're going to start finding creepy.
I
Like, and
mean,
people are.
it's already gotten kind of creepy, right?
It's
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 like,
already creepy, but to the point where like everyday people are going to start to say, "Okay, I care about privacy now." So that's my hope for a privacy renaissance, and it's going to happen at the time where we're just about going to get the tools ready where everyday people can use them. There's a lot of stuff emerging in the kind of cypherpunk and privacy communities, and zero knowledge cryptography is just getting there, and we're right there to being able to like have really usable privacy technology for everyday people, which I think is just going to happen at exactly the right time that we really, really need it. So yeah, I care about it, but I think it's going to cause a like an existential debate with because there's a kind of like way that society accepts this, and we go, okay, people have got privacy tools now, and we can't actually see what they're up to when they're using them. Okay, that's fine. Or we can say we need to stop that, right? And governments start really trying to push against it. And they don't recognize that it's open source tools and they can't stop it, you know?
mhm.
Um, and so we're about to hit this kind of real tension, I think, between the technology getting to where it's really capable and everyone's starting to use it, and governments getting really mad about that. So
Mm.
yeah, that's my kind of hot take on that.
Yeah. I think the funny thing, based on what you just said, is like a lot of times you hear people, like regular people saying like, "Oh, I don't want the government getting my information or whatever." And it's like you said, like it's the government's not gonna do anything creepy with your information unless you like commit a crime or something, and
Oh, they
they do.
might, but
Well,
like they at
I
least if
guess they
they
still might.
like, yeah, they probably might, but like, yeah, at least if they're gonna like throw you in prison or something, then you've got to go through the courts at least.
Yeah. Do
But
you
yeah,
think
it
it's
yeah.
I was just gonna say, do you think it's like too late for people to like for example, like my husband is not on social media at all. He's like, I don't want my information out there. He's actually like
Yeah.
has a very small digital footprint. But do you think that that actually helps him like helps do you think like the government and corporations and stuff have actually like less information on him, or do you think they still have information on him?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. If you don't leave a digital footprint online, like they will absolutely have less information. But it kind of really depends. There was a guy recently who the it was the guy who managed to take over the SEC's account, like Twitter
Yeah.
account,
Mm-hmm.
and posted that the Bitcoin ETF had
Right.
happened. I don't know if he was just doing it for kind of for like just for fun or whatever, or he was long Bitcoin or something. But they found him from his Google searches, right? So the everyone leaves a digital footprint everywhere, and especially if you're using things like Google Maps and and if you're using a cell phone, like they can triangulate where you are. There's like
Right.
the information. If they want, if you're a person of interest, they will find out almost everything about you. And it's very, very difficult to remain genuinely private. But the more that you put online, the more that everyone has it, right?
Mm,
So broadcasting what you're up to all day, every day on social media definitely does enable a lot more actors who don't have access to the cell phone towers and things to be able to
right.
track you and do stuff with it. So nation states, if they want to know about you, they'll know about you. There's nothing you can do about that. If but if you put it online, then brands know about you, and all
Yeah.
marketing agencies and data resellers and all of these people who are just like trying to like spam you with stuff. And at least that's just a quality of life improvement if you don't give them that.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Another question we have is from Disruption Joe. He wants to know, what are your thoughts on WorldCoin?
Oh, thanks, Joe. I I hate WorldCoin so much. It's unbelievable. I think it's the worst idea ever done in crypto. And like that is saying something. It's worse than all the Ponzi's, it's worse
Wow.
than FTX, it's worse than
Wow.
everything. It's an attack on global identity. I'm gonna get worked up if I really go down this, but like I am deeply suspicious of it. And I don't think it is what it's portrayed to be. And for one, it's not a solution to Sybil. I've been researching Sybil resistance for many years, longer than Sam, and the idea of collapsing your identity to your eyeballs does not fix the problem. It incentivizes the creation of eyeball farms, which there is, right? There's people being farmed for their eyeballs.
Yeah.
And until recently, they were just like, look, here's $30, go and scan your eyeballs and give me your, take this phone, go and sign up, give me the phone back. Nice and easy, right? But now they've added these liveness checks into it, in which case you actually need to have those people captive in order to do it, right? So I think it will have incredibly nasty second order effects. I think it's very likely tools like that will be sold to nation states and will be used to issue their digital identity systems. I actually think that's the play, is to build the hardware that will be when the whole world installs digital identity and all of their and issues them to all their citizens, the orbs will be there, or to do it for them. And I just like hate it. I think it's dangerous in many, many ways, because once you're in, you can't get out. Like once you've put your eyeballs on the blockchain, they've just added something that makes it possible to sort of essentially be forgotten, barely. But the thing is, if it's used by you know powerful actors like nation states, they can just turn all the privacy stuff off. They can just turn the right to forget off, and it's open
Right.
source. And now like anyone, any despot in the world anywhere could install orbs on every street and make people check into them every day. And it's just a terrible, terrible, terrible idea. I think, and it doesn't solve Sybil or disinformation or anything of the sort. Like it's until everyone in the world has to go to an orb that it doesn't stop fake news.
Yeah. It
So
just
yeah,
encourages people to kidnap people and kill them for their eyeballs.
it's just well, you can't kill them. You need them alive to do
Right.
the
You need them
liveness
alive.
checks. Neither, well, but you can like, and this is the thing. At the moment, it's a bit like the podcast example we had earlier. At the moment, there's nothing to do on
Hmm.
World. I mean, it's called World now, not WorldCoin or
Oh, yeah.
whatever.
Right, right,
But
right.
there's like, there's barely anything. You'll it won't be long before you get some free money. He wants to do UBI with it. Um, and as soon as you've got people who have to go to orbs to get free money, they'll all do it, right? Because everyone
Right.
wants the free money. It's just like a test for some bigger plan. We don't know what the bigger plan is. But as soon as there is high value reasons to have those world IDs, then absolutely people will be held captive for their eyeballs. That's just gonna will happen. So yeah, I'm not a fan.
Very scary. How different is it from like our biometric data to like go through passport control at the airport or to like open up your unlock your iPhone? Like how different is it?
Yeah,
Is what? Yeah.
yeah. This is one that's used like it's like, oh, it's fine. We do it all the time. I have to do it to go through. For one, there's like this like notion of immutability, right? For one, that actually those are accountable systems run by they're actually fairly decentralized. These systems, right? The privacy of those data um, is is located with the governance systems of countries, right? You have that your nation state grants you the right to a passport, right? This is like one of the things that nation states give you, the freedom of movement and your right to exist and be a citizen in that country. And your identity is essentially brokered by them. And they are democratic institutions. You know, this isn't. This is a corporate entity with a low float shitcoin that is attempting to supersede the identity level of nation states. So it's very different. It's like who holds the power to issue identities. It's trying to one up the nation states, right? So it's like there's that. And like Face ID, I've used that for years. Why? Because it's the data is held on a secure enclave on my phone and never goes anywhere. Um, and you know, it's not. And if I want another phone and with another Face ID, I can do that. The
Right.
difference with WorldCoin is that it's like you can't then set up another ID ever, right? And they're revocable. So if I get my ID taken away from me, I'll never get another one. It's impossible. So like you can imagine that nation state does it, ping, your identity's been revoked. Okay, now I don't have access to money, freedom of travel, I can't go anywhere, like I can't like all you need to imagine is a revocable digital identity that governs your access to like services. And it's a way of like it perfect top down control. Like I can govern a billion people from a control room at that point.
Yeah.
So it's incredibly powerful and dangerous system. That if nation, I'm not care about him doing it and slinging his shit coins with it. I don't care, right? It's when nation states do it. That's that's when it gets utterly terrifying, because it gives a power that is too powerful for anyone to hold.
Do you think nation states will actually adopt it? Like, don't you think there's someone that works in the government that's going to be like, whoa, 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 this is a bad idea for all the reasons
Oh,
you
I think
just
they
mentioned?
absolutely will. Yeah, I think it'll probably happen soon. I think there's yeah, he just needs to. He's gone around and shook the hands of every. He knows that we've got them all on speed dial. He just needs to flip one in. Um, and yeah, I think it's likely, to be honest.
Scary, very
God,
scary.
this has gone a bit. God, this is why I don't like talking about WorldCoin.
This got dark so
It's
fast.
it takes, it makes me sound like a paranoid loon, and like
No, but
and
not at all though. Like it's so realistic. Like it's you're not like the tinfoil hat guy, you know? Like this what you're
yeah,
saying is like very realistic.
it is realistic and it's right there, right? It's like all it takes for our nation state to install it and turn off the privacy elements and it's done, right? It's not a million miles away from fantasy. So yeah, it's a dangerous game, and it's the first time in crypto where I've thought actually we could end up we can make things worse here. I always thought this was a kind of force for good in the world, apart from the rugs, and apart from the fact that people can lose their money like by gambling on the wrong things and losing their keys and what have you. I genuinely thought like the pressure on decentralization was like a force for good. But then I thought, oh, but this one just made me realize, oh, actually, we could make something truly horrible with all this stuff.
Hmm.
And yeah, it's kind of put a dampener on it for me, frankly.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, just to put it lightly. Why don't we switch gears a little bit? I'm going to get to a couple
Yeah.
more lighthearted questions to wrap it up
Yes,
on a more lighthearted and
let's
positive
go
note.
very
So,
light after
very,
that.
very light, very light. Here's another question from Naomi. She said, "What fiction book should everyone read at least once?"
Oh, yeah, thanks for that one, Naomi. The Cryptonomicon.
The
Um,
Cryptonomicon.
yeah, by Neil Stevenson. So it's a fantastic book. About 10 years before Bitcoin came out. But it's a story. So Neil Stevenson wrote Snow Crash, which is where the idea of the metaverse came from. And brilliant author. Highly advise you to go and like start on Snow Crash maybe, but because the Cryptonomicon is like a thick book, right? But it follows like the dawn of cryptography through like the Second World War and how numbers and cryptography have been used to like defend secrets, and it's got like a storyline that spans like 60, 70 years. But in it there's a group of guys who basically invent Bitcoin, and they're talking about like this gold backed sort of currency that's decentralized and censorship resistant, and it's eerie how close to the Bitcoin idea it is. It's like it's 10 years before Bitcoin, and it's so
Wow.
close. Yeah.
Wow. Okay, I will definitely check that out. Another lighthearted question. What is West Ham? We could spend a whole episode just talking about this. So
What
this is
is West
the
Ham?
how the conversation went was Andy was then like, make him explain it in 5 seconds so we can just get a little
Oh,
sound bite
okay.
and use it over and over. So if you had to
Um,
explain it in 5 seconds or one sentence or whatever, how would you explain to people what West Ham is?
what is it? It's West Ham is a cabal. It's a cult. It's a network state. It's a dictatorship. It's West Ham. I refuse to elaborate.
Love it. Let's just leave it that way, and people who want to figure it out can dive deeper and figure it out. And the
Yeah.
dictator, just to clarify, is Lawrence, right? We all know that.
Yes, that's Lawrence.
Okay, yeah. Lawrence will be on the podcast. I think the episode after you, or very shortly thereafter. So
Yeah.
I'm gonna ask him if he in fact is the dictator of West
Oh,
Ham
he
and see
is.
what he says.
Whether he admits it or not is a different matter.
Yeah. Okay. Last question I asked everybody this season is looking ahead to 2025. If you had to just give one word or one phrase to sum up how you are predicting 2025 to turn out, what would you say?
Decentralized. I think it's the
Okay.
year we'll actually care about decentralization. I think we finally learnt a lesson. I
We're
think
finally there, huh?
I think it's got to be the time. Like if we don't do it now, then we'll just descend into being the place where everyone just gambles on nonsense meme coins,
Yeah.
and we'll stay there. But if we actually realize that being actually decentralized and permissionless, that's going to unlock DAOs, right? It's instead of just pretending we've got these decentralized systems, we actually build them. That's going to unlock the actual new way of working that we've been waiting for.
The pressure is on. I
Yeah.
hope you're right, and I hope we get there. Well, thank you so much, Nick, for taking the time. Where can people find you if they want to follow you personally, and how can people go check out Factory DAO and the other things that you're working on?
So yeah, I'm Dr. Nick A on X. Dr. Nick on Farcaster. I'm going to make a entrance over there soon. FactoryDAO.org for Factory DAO, and FactoryLabs.org for the company related to us.
Perfect. We'll include all of those in the show notes to make it easy for people to click through. Thanks so much again for taking the time and for putting up with my scheduling issues. Thank you, listeners, for tuning in, and we'll be back again next Thursday with another episode of Rehash.
Thanks so much.
All right, I've just stopped the recording, so we're no longer recording. Thanks for that. That was